Hey everyone, so this is a bonus chapter that I thought I'd add on after I'd finished recording it, just to give you a few tips on how you might want to change the rig, a few other things you might want to do, and how to perhaps use the rig for like creating poses and setting it up for animation. I've opened up the rig finished Cinema 4D file that was supplied from us, but of course you can use your finished rig and probably make more sense. I wanted to bring up the issue of the controllers, and we use null objects for this, and as you know, we can set the display shape in here. Now, a lot of people that build rigs don't necessarily use nulls like this in Cinema. Some people use splines instead. One of the reasons for that is because they're just a bit easier to select. So in this view here, you can see I can click through and select my controllers pretty easily. I can select the torso controller here, and do my stuff. But it's not always that simple. If we're in close, somewhere like here, and I'm trying to select it, I can click here to select it, but we might not have that such a clear view, and I'm trying to click to select it here, and you can see that now I've selected the SDS rather than selecting the actual controller itself. Very often if you've got a spline, it's a little bit easier. I think maybe this is improved in more recent versions, but if you are having trouble or you're not happy with using nulls, then you can use all of those shapes, or you could even assemble them together and make them editable if you wanted alternative shapes. When we created the rig, we added a lot of controls to the root null Roger up here, and if we select that, you can see them down in the attribute manager. So we've got controls for the mouth, eyes, thumbs, fingers, etc. And we also set up this reset pose checkbox. So if we take our character and repose him, even just like that, we can come here and reset the pose. Now, the thing with that reset pose is actually if you leave that active, it's a bit of a gotcha because you might be trying to move your rig and it won't work. So always remember that that's a click on and click off. But if we come into, say, our left hand here, and we start to create a pose for this hand, so maybe we want to, have him pointing or something, so we bend those fingers. So we've got this kind of pointing pose, and maybe we want to open up his thumb a bit more. And straighten that finger out. You can see we've done that, but now if we come up and we choose to reset pose, it doesn't do anything. It doesn't reset this. So if you've gone through and messed up all these sliders and they're all over the place, you don't really want to have to go through each one and reset the value. So what you can do is you can click on them and select them by shift clicking to select them all, and then you can right click and you can choose reset to default. So when mine reset to default, you can see that they're reset to different values. Some reset to 20, some to 50. If we come up here, the mouse resets to 0. I'm just going to right click, choose deselect all. To set these defaults up, you simply do it in the user data. So if we want to find the perfect default setting for our finger, I can look at my finger here and I know that if we have that at 0, it's going to be straight. And if we have it all the way up to 100, it's actually going to intersect the hand because we've kind of got an overshoot on there in both directions. But I can see that around 20 is a nice sort of relaxed pose, or maybe even 10 would be better. So if you come up to Edit User Data, Manage User Data, you can come over to your items in here, and here we can find our left finger one bend. You can see down here I've set the default value of 20. So whatever setting you put in this default value field is the one that's used when you choose reset to default. So you could add that to the rig and have another button, but it's pretty quick to just right click these and choose reset to default. And by leaving it like this, you can just reset one hand, for example, if you want to leave the other one the same. The next tip that I wanted to share with you was how I might use a rig like this to set up a bunch of poses. And maybe if I want to do some kind of look development and try a few different poses, I wanted to show you a nice quick way of doing that using takes. First thing you need to do is make sure that you don't have any takes. So if I switch to the takes, you can see I've just got the main take, which is the default. You can't get rid of that one. So now we know we're on our main take, we can switch back to the objects. Let's just zoom out so we can see all of this guy. Okay, and I want to come in and I'm going to just choose reset pose because I want to make sure that the pose is at its default setting. I'm also going to come down and select all of these and choose reset to default. It looks like I've got my link eyes incorrect. I want that one to be on by default, so I'm just going to put that on in the main take. So now we've done this, we don't really want to change anything within this take. We're going to just create new takes and we're going to use those for our poses. So I'm going to switch over to the Takes tab, come up and just add a new take, and let's just call this Step. Now up here you can see I've got this active, which means that auto take mode is enabled, and you can see that these have all gone blue. If we uncheck this, you can see they go back to normal and they're all locked, and that's because we've got lock overrides on here. If we uncheck that, then you can adjust them, but that's just the same as adjusting them in the main take. So we need to leave that on, and if we want to override any of these settings, we can right click and choose override. But a much quicker way of doing it is to use auto takes. If you check this, you can see that all the parameters go blue. Now I do have one selected here, so let's just right click and choose deselect all. So now we can see that they are indeed all blue. And if we look at the coordinates up here, you can see these are blue as well. Now the reason they're blue is to just tell us that we're in a take and that we have auto override enabled. And basically what that means is if we change any of the parameters now, they're going to change them in this take only. They're going to override that parameter. And if we go back to our main take, it will still be on the value that's set in there. So if we come to our side view, for example, and we come back to our objects, let's select our left foot controller, and you can see these are all blue on here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just select that again, in fact, and let's just move that up. You can see as soon as I do that, they're not blue anymore. They've been overridden. Those parameters are overridden. And if we come back to takes, you can see in here, step, objects, and if we fold this down, there's our left foot controller, coordinates, and we've overridden the position values. That's telling us what the overrides are. So now what we can do is we can come in and we can basically pose this. So if we wanted to do like a kind of a gooky kind of walk thing, we could have him his foot here. Always, let's just take the hips, pull those down a bit, maybe take his right foot, pull that back with a bit of heel lift. For some reason I'm not selecting them in the viewport, but I don't really think that matters. We could grab his torso, maybe lean him forward a bit. You know, and the same, we could take his hands. We could maybe put this one here and rotate that around. You know, same with the other hand, and make a very quick pose. I'm not sure what he's doing. He's looking a bit weird, but he's having fun. And now we've created that pose, and if we come back to our takes and fold this down, you can see that, let me just unfold it all by holding control, and you can see that we've got overrides for all of those parameters. And if we come back to our main take, he resets to his default. So we've created one pose just as a take. And the nice thing about this is you can actually then create more more child takes. Just right click new child take, and you could call this like a step bigger, you know. And now if we come back to our rig and we just make that even bigger, and let's pull this one back. See, there we go. I can't, so this is where I should have used splines. There we go. And the torso, he's really leaning forward. I won't worry about the arms. And now you can see that we've created a couple of variations. So you can quickly create multiple poses in here and still come back to your main take and everything is intact. So you could effectively build a whole library of poses using this sort of technique. This is great for look development if you're trying to work out specific poses for a certain scene and you don't really want to have multiple copies of your character. You can just use takes in this way. So I'm going to delete that now anyway, and let's come back to our objects. The next thing I wanted to talk about was if we were going to animate this. Now you've seen that sometimes selecting these can be a little bit tricky when we sometimes select the wrong thing. But the other thing as well is that maybe we select a piece and we move it and it shouldn't be moved. So for instance, the torso controller, maybe I grab this and move it and, you know, obviously that isn't really working now because if I rotate that, it's doing some weird thing. Why is that over there? So maybe you want to protect some of your controllers. Now the torso is a good example of this because we don't really want to move that around. So we can come up to our torso controller and we can add in a tag. So in R21, the tag is under rigging. I'm going to come down and add in protection. In earlier versions, I believe it's under the Cinema 4D tags. If we add a protection tag, you can see that now this has locked our position, scale and rotation. And if we select the torso, we can't do anything with it. You can see that the actual axis is slightly grayed out. If we switch to our move tool, we still can't move it. But what we want to do on this object is we just want to lock the position and scale and unlock our rotation. So we set that to none. And now if we select this, press R, we can now rotate around. But if we press E, we still can't move it. So we're kind of setting up our controllers specific to the motion that we want them to do. Some of your parts may want, like the foot control, you may want to rotate and reposition, but other elements such as the torso controller, you only really want to rotate. And the head is another example of that. So if you want to, you can go through and add these protection tags throughout your rig. Now, I wouldn't be too strict about it, because sometimes you may think, I only want to rotate the foot on this angle. But occasionally you may want to break those rules. And if you link all of this through into your rig, maybe through some espresso, if you start changing these settings, then it can mess up the rig. So it's a good idea to restrict movement that definitely isn't required, but maybe leave the rig a little bit loose so that you can do unnatural poses if required. Now, because we've got our rig set up with all of our controllers up here at the top of our object hierarchy, and on the very root we've got our main null with all of the controls, we shouldn't really need to kind of unfold the hierarchy and come down into here at all to animate any of these elements. If you find that you're animating elements within this hierarchy, then it's probably better to create some other control and keep them all in one place. That gives you the advantage that all of your keys will all be at the top here on these objects, or they'll be in here on the user data. Now, the nice thing about that is that you don't need to delve deep into the hierarchy if you need to find a specific deformer and adjust, say, a strength value, or you need to rotate a joint somewhere deep in your hierarchy. You can do it all up here, nice and simple. But we can do more than that. We can also set it up so that we only actually keyframe the parameters that are important. And the torso, again, is a good example of this. So if I want to work with my torso, I know now that I've got a protection tag on here, and I can only rotate it. I'm only ever going to record rotation keyframes. I'm not going to need to record any position keyframes. And you can come up to the attribute manager and you can just click on the R here and then control click on the keyframes to just keyframe that parameter only. But if you're doing that for every single thing in your rig, it's going to be a bit slow and cumbersome. Let me just undo that to remove that. Now, another way, of course, is to use the record button down here. So you can either click record or you can use the auto record, depending on which you prefer. But what we need to do is make sure that it only records the parameters that are important. Now, we can uncheck these individual icons, which will say, for example, if we uncheck them all except for this first one, it's only going to keyframe position. And if I hit record now, you can see that it has indeed only keyframed the position values. Let's just undo that again, because we don't want to keyframe position on that. We want to keyframe rotation. So I could just say rotation, and now it's going to record my rotation only. So now I've set keys for the rotation here. But still, that's not desirable, because some objects we will want to record position, some rotation, and others we'll want to record both. So let's just enable all of these again, and I'm just going to shift control click to get rid of that track. Let's right click and just choose deselect all. Now what we can do is we can use what are called keyframe selections. Now, believe it or not, keyframe selections allow you to select what's going to be keyframed. Amazing. The way we do it is pretty simple. So for example, with our torso controller, just select that, make sure the object's selected, switch to the parameter that you want to keyframe. So in this example, it's just the rotation. So we can click on the R to select all 3 rotation channels. Now, if you right click, choose animation, add keyframe selection. Now, if I just choose deselect all, you can see that these have acquired this sort of dull orange color. It's not the same as if they're selected, although it's pretty close, and it would be handy if this was actually a different, more obvious color, but that's a different story. Let me just choose deselect all. And that orange tint on there tells me that even if I've got all of these parameters enabled for recording, that's the only thing that's going to create keyframes for. So now if I hit record, you can see it only records on those rotation channels. Let's just undo. If I wanted to do the hand, for example, I could choose rotation, and I can control click on the position, right click, choose animation, add keyframe selection. you can go through your whole rig and set that up for each of your controllers or objects within the hierarchy. And now if we deselect all, you can see that on the right hand I haven't got any, but on the left hand I have now got rotation and position keyframe selections. If I hit record, it's only going to record on those parameters. So that's really handy for keeping your timeline nice and tidy and recording only the elements that you need. And it works great with auto keyframing. So if you just want to be concentrating on the animation, not worrying about those kind of things, set up your keyframe selections, use auto keying, create your animation, and there's going to be a lot less to tidy up in the timeline as you go through and clean up all of your animation. So I hope those tips helped you out, and now you better get going and start creating some keyframes.